05:32 hours. Northern Arabian Sea. The sea was calm in the way that makes professionals uneasy. No commercial traffic within visual range. No civilian radio chatter. Just a carrier strike group moving on a steady course. Speed unchanged. Flight operations proceeding as scheduled. USS Dwight D. Eisenhower cut a straight line through the water. Escorts holding textbook geometry. Destroyers wide. Cruisers offset. Every sensor layered and redundant. Nothing suggested escalation. Nothing suggested crisis. Then the sky changed. Not visually. Digitally. A sharp spike appeared on long-range infrared sensors. High altitude, high energy, rising fast from deep inside Iranian territory. The signature wasn't ballistic in the traditional sense. It didn't follow a predictable arc. It didn't behave like a cruise missile either. It climbed almost vertically. The track auto classification system hesitated for a fraction of a second before updating. Hypersonic profile. Unconfirmed. No alarms sounded yet. On a U.S. carrier, alarms mean certainty. This was still analysis. The object accelerated past Mach 5 within seconds. That alone made it unprecedented. Iran had announced hypersonic ambitions for years. Tehran had claimed tests, videos, statements. But claims are cheap. Physics is not. This object wasn't a press release. It was real. The missile did not head toward the carrier. That detail mattered. Instead, it climbed to extreme altitude, then leveled off, skimming the edge of space, maintaining velocity, radiating heat intense enough to light up every infrared sensor across the region. It was a test, but it wasn't a safe one, because the missile's lateral range placed it inside the same battlespace as the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Iran hadn't fired at the fleet. Iran had fired near it, and that distinction was deliberate. 0604 hours. Inside U.S. Central Command. In Tampa, the watch floor changed posture without a word being spoken. Missile defense officers leaned forward. Analysts stopped typing. The real-time feed expanded across multiple displays. Infrared tracking, space-based sensors, maritime radar correlation. The missile wasn't maneuvering aggressively. That was the problem. It was maneuvering cleanly. Hypersonic weapons don't need accuracy to be threatening. Their value lies in compression, compressing time, decision space, and confidence. Traditional missile defense relies on prediction. This missile refused to be predicted. It didn't follow a ballistic arc. It didn't descend. It rode the atmosphere, adjusting altitude slightly, maintaining velocity while bleeding minimal energy. Someone in the room said it quietly. This isn't a demonstration. It's a message. The estimated impact zone was empty ocean. Intentionally so. Iran wasn't trying to hit anything. Iran was trying to prove it could. More troubling was what followed. As the missile maintained flight, Iranian coastal radar systems lit up in coordinated patterns, tracking the missile, yes, but also probing outward. Frequency shifts, pulse timing changes, data link activity. This wasn't just a missile test. It was sensor warfare. Iran was watching who watched them. At sea, the carrier strike group did not maneuver. That, too, was deliberate. A sudden course change would signal uncertainty. A speed change would suggest concern. Instead, the Eisenhower group remained predictable, because predictability removes ambiguity from later escalation. The escorts adjusted sensor modes quietly. No radar spikes, no overt defensive posture. But below the surface, submarines slowed. In the air, combat air patrol spacing tightened. The fleet wasn't reacting. It was absorbing information. 0641 hours. The missile had already crossed its peak envelope. The hypersonic vehicle began its terminal phase, not toward a target, but toward descent. Its speed dipped slightly. Its thermal signature shifted. Control surfaces adjusted. This was the moment every analyst had been waiting for. Could Iran control the missile through re-entry? The answer came quickly. Yes. The vehicle maintained coherence as it descended, shedding plasma in controlled patterns. Guidance didn't collapse. Telemetry didn't vanish. The missile struck the ocean hundreds of miles from the carrier, exactly where Iran intended. No explosion. No splash visible from the fleet. Just confirmation. Iran had demonstrated boost capability, sustained hypersonic glide, terminal control, and it had done so inside an active U.S. naval battlespace. That changed everything. Because hypersonic weapons don't threaten ships by hitting them. They threaten ships by forcing commanders to decide faster than doctrine allows. On the Eisenhower, the Combat Information Center was silent. No one cheered. No one relaxed. Because the real question wasn't whether the missile could hit. It was whether the next one would be launched without warning. And that question didn't belong to the fleet anymore. It belonged to Washington. 0710 hours. No orders were given. That was the shock. No retaliatory deployment. No public statement. No elevation of visible readiness. The carrier group continued on course. But inside classified networks, posture shifted. Missile defense priorities were rewritten. Sensor fusion parameters changed. Certain engagement assumptions, long held as stable, were quietly marked obsolete. Iran hadn't crossed a red line, it had erased one. For decades, missile defense doctrine assumed time, seconds, sometimes minutes, to assess trajectory, intent, and response. Hypersonic systems removed that buffer. Iran wasn't challenging U.S. firepower. It was challenging decision authority. And for the first time, Pentagon planners had to confront an uncomfortable reality. The next crisis might not allow debate. 0900 hours. The fleet never turned back. The Eisenhower strike group completed its transit. Flight operations resumed at normal tempo. Publicly, nothing happened. But internally, everything changed. Iran's test didn't trigger a war. It triggered a rewrite. A rewrite of timelines. A rewrite of assumptions. A rewrite of what deterrence actually means in a world where missiles don't ask permission from physics. Iran fired a hypersonic missile near a U.S. fleet and learned something valuable. So did the Pentagon. The next time, the missile might not be a test. And next time, silence might not be an option. 0947 hours. Washington, D.C. The first classified briefing ended without questions. That alone told the story. In the Pentagon's secure conference room, senior civilian and uniformed leadership stared at a wall of data that refused to simplify. There was no explosion to point at. No damage assessment. No wreckage. Just telemetry, heat curves, maneuver envelopes, and one uncomfortable conclusion written between the lines. Iran had just inserted itself into the hypersonic conversation. Not at parity. Not at dominance. But close enough to force recalculation. The missile test had technically complied with international norms. It landed in international waters. No warnings were violated. No engagement thresholds crossed. But deterrence does not operate on legality. It operates on perception. And the perception now was that a regional power, long constrained by sanctions, surveillance, and interception, had demonstrated a weapon class specifically designed to compress American response options. A four-star general finally spoke. This wasn't about the fleet. It was about us. No one disagreed. 10:22 hours. Northern Arabian Sea. Below the surface, the quiet work continued. U.S. attack submarines adjusted patrol boxes subtly, favoring sensor dominance over proximity. Hypersonic weapons do not threaten submarines directly, but the networks that cue them do. Above, ISR aircraft expanded their orbits, not aggressively, methodically. Iranian radar emissions were logged, categorized, and compared against historical baselines. Something stood out. Iran's tracking behavior during the missile's glide phase had been disciplined. Minimal chatter. No unnecessary emissions. No excited spikes. That suggested rehearsal. which meant this test was not a beginning, it was a checkpoint. 11:08 hours. Inside the Iranian Defense Ministry, celebration was restrained. There were no speeches, no footage released yet, no social media triumphs. Iranian planners understood escalation math. The missile test wasn't a victory lap, it was a probe. A way to test American reaction without forcing one. A way to demonstrate capability without triggering retaliation. And more importantly, a way to send a signal to third parties. Russia. China, regional allies watching quietly. Iran could now claim something it had never convincingly held before. Credible access to a time compression weapon. That changes how others treat you, even if they don't say it publicly. 12:41 hours. Brussels. NATO's internal messaging was calm on the surface, but the subtext was unmistakable. Hypersonic defense was no longer a future problem. It was a present one. European planners understood geography differently than Pacific or Middle Eastern commands. Shorter distances, denser airspace, less reaction time. Iran's test wasn't just about the Gulf. It was about precedent. If one sanctioned state could field a controllable hypersonic system, others would follow, or buy. That realization rippled quietly through alliance channels. 13:55 hours. Northern Arabian Sea. The carrier strike group received a routine message from Fifth Fleet Command. No change in mission. But one line stood out. Assume contested decision environment. That phrase didn't exist in doctrine 5 years ago. It meant something specific. Assume that the next engagement, if it comes, will not allow time to clarify intent. Assume that ambiguity will be intentional. Assume that silence may be part of the weapon. The fleet adjusted accordingly, not visibly, but internally timeline shortened. 15:30 hours. Tehran State Media Headquarters. The announcement finally came. Carefully worded, technically accurate, politically loaded. Iran confirmed a successful test of a new generation missile system capable of penetrating advanced defenses. No mention of the U.S. fleet. No threats. No triumphal language. Just capability. That restraint was strategic. Because Iran didn't want applause. It wanted doubt. 17:02 hours. Washington, D.C. The real debate began behind closed doors. Not about retaliation. About stability. Hypersonic weapons destabilize not because they are unstoppable, but because they reduce confidence. They force decision-makers to act on partial information. During the Cold War, time was the buffer. Radar detection provided minutes. Hotlines existed for clarification. Hypersonics erase that margin. They make restraint harder to prove, and miscalculation easier to justify. That is why the Pentagon didn't respond publicly. Any visible reaction would validate the test's psychological objective. Instead, silence became the counter-signal. 19:18 hours. Northern Arabian Sea. The Eisenhower group completed another flight cycle. Jets launched. Jets recovered. Nothing unusual. But every pilot, every watch officer, every commander now operated under a new mental model. The question was no longer, can we stop it? The question was, will we know soon enough to choose? That distinction matters, because modern conflict isn't decided by destruction. It's decided by timing. 21:40 hours. Intelligence Assessment Summary. The final classified assessment avoided dramatic language. It didn't need to. It concluded that Iran's test did not represent immediate battlefield dominance, but did represent a durable shift in regional deterrence dynamics. In simpler terms, Iran hadn't won anything. But it had changed the game board. And games that change boards tend to escalate, not because anyone wants war, but because old instincts no longer apply cleanly. 23 o'clock hours. Northern Arabian Sea. The fleet maintained course. The sea stayed calm. But the environment was no longer predictable. Because somewhere inland, engineers were already working on the next iteration. And somewhere else, planners were asking a question that has no easy answer. How do you deter a weapon that doesn't give you time to be certain? That question, not the missile, is what Pentagon planners did not expect. And that question is not going away.